Hello, and welcome back to Modern Infrastructure here at Pulumi TV. My name is David Flanagan, although you may know me from across the internet as Raw Code. I'm a developer advocate at Pulumi, and today I want to spend the next 10 minutes ish sharing with you ways to migrate existing Terraform projects over to Pulumi using a few different tools and techniques. We're in a lucky time and age as developers where infrastructure as code is no longer new. People have been practicing infrastructure as code for a while, and you may just be new to Pulumi. So you may be wondering, how do I take all this existing stuff that I have and bring it over to the Pulumi ecosystem? And I'm going to share a few resources with you today. Well, there is my screen. The first thing I want to talk about is something that I've been working on within the Pulumi-verse organization on GitHub. The Pulumi-verse organization was started by a group of Pulumi community members who wanted a centralized place for non-official Pulumi stuff to live. I'm very fortunate to be able to contribute to this as much as I can. And one of the things that I really want to be able to help people with is that migration step that we're talking about today. So we have started over only the last month putting together the Terraform migration guide. This guide is going to be built out over the next weeks and months for sure, but it's hopefully going to cover some of those hurdles that people often hit. So, the first thing in this guide that we cover is the Terraform HCL guide. We're going to assume with this guide that people have written some Terraform before and are relatively comfortable with the HashiCorp configuration language. But what you may not understand when you're making that jump from Terraform to Pulumi is, well, what do some of those patterns or what does HCL look like in the various Pulumi languages? And that's what that guide is there for. The second part here is the TF to Pulumi guide. TF to Pulumi is a tool that we'll be looking at during this session, which can convert Terraform. Hold on, I put my do not disturb on. Uh, joys of live. Sweet. Yeah, the TF to Pulumi is a tool that can help you convert Terraform into Pulumi code. And I'll show you some examples of that as well as some more advanced stuff that you can do with the Pulumi import command and even some scripting. Now, this guide doesn't exist yet, but it will be coming soon. We're making some improvements to TF to Pulumi. Again, we will cover that in today's session. So fear not, you do not need to know all this stuff. Now, if you take a look at the HCL guide, you'll see that we have just some examples of common things that people do in HCL that they may not be sure how to bring across the Pulumi ecosystem. So the first one here is we take a look at code reuse. What does that mean? Well, in Terraform, we have a concept of a module. We can group a bunch of TF files together, ship them in a Git repository, and consume them via this module syntax with inputs and outputs. Now, the way that this works in Pulumi is not going to be a surprise to most people. Is that Pulumi uses real programming languages and not a DSL. So there's no direct equivalent of modules except for if you're using Go. Well, you would just use Go mod and you would ship your Pulumi code that way. NPM for TypeScript and JavaScript, PyPy for Python, Maven for Java, NuGet for .NET. Hopefully nothing too surprising there. What we call out in this guide, though, is that, there's no real need for the concept of a module because within Pulumi, you can refactor all of your code to functions and classes, to component resources and dynamic resources. So really, you just have to consider it like software, right? Like when you build out your applications within your organization, when you see something that is repeated multiple times, we apply the dry concept where we do not repeat ourselves. So we extract and refactor things into functions. Once those functions become stable, it may be that we want to provide more composition of those functions. So we may tweak the inputs and the outputs. We may break them down into multiple functions and have higher order functions. Like all of these things that we do as good software development practices directly apply to our Pulumi. So there's no direct module. but I think there's much better options. Something that people will be very accustomed to from the HCL landscape is that if they want conditional resources, the trick here is to set the count to a tertiary value of 1 or 0. And in Pulumi, well, we can just use our programming language constructs. So if we were doing this in TypeScript, we would have an if statement that checked some condition, and then if we wish to, we would create the resource inside. Now, I'm not going to go through all of these. You're more than welcome to come and take a look at all of these blocks. We're going to add more over time. Taking a look at the Terraform ecosystem and trying to give people a really good path to understand and migrate their code when they're not doing it automatically. It may be that you're doing partial migrations. It may be that you're spinning up your Pulumi project in stacks, keeping your existing Terraform and doing things in a slow but intentional way, and that's okay. This guide is there to help. So you can find that at github.com/pulumi-terraform-migration-guide. And I hope that's the last time I have to say that out loud. Okay. The next thing I want to cover is the Pulumi import command. So we have a fantastic page of documentation here at pulumi.com. You can find it by going to docs, user guides, adopting Pulumi, and importing infrastructure. I will create a short link for this and stick it into the show notes as soon as I'm done, I promise. But there's a few ways to import your existing infrastructure. The first one shown here is that we can use the Pulumi import command. So this is when you're doing that intentional but maybe slow moving migration from one ecosystem. It may not even be Terraform, it could be any other infrastructure as code tool, and bringing it into the Pulumi ecosystem is that we can just run Pulumi import against a single piece of infrastructure. What this does is it will import this into your state file, and there is an option to generate the code. And you'll end up with code that looks something like this. You can tweak the way that the Pulumi import command works, but all the options are described on the CLI. You can see that we have a generate code. Where is it? Argument here. This defaults to true, so you don't need to worry about it. What it does is it will print the code to your terminal. If you do not want it to do that and you want it instead to write it to a file, you can use -o or --out, and that will stick the same code but into a file, so you don't need to do that manually. And there's a few other options here, especially if you're importing database things or stuff that you consider mission critical. Then make sure that you mark these as protected. And if you need to change any properties, there's flags for that. If you want to build a parent or a hierarchy of resources, you can do that too. There's lots of abilities on the Pulumi import command. And if you check our release blog from in May, there's a whole blog about the improvements and changes that we made to the Pulumi import command. The link will be in the show notes directly after this live stream. So again, don't worry about going to find it. I'll make sure you've got something to click shortly. Now, the Pulumi import command is great, but it can be a little bit laborious. We're doing things one resource at a time. And this is where we have the tf to Pulumi command. Oh, sorry. There we go. tf to Pulumi is a tool that can read Terraform programs and give you Pulumi code in any of our supported SDKs. You can install it via Homebrew on Mac and Linux, and you can run it with just, there we go, tf to Pulumi, and then provide a target language. By default, you're going to get Node.js, and we're going to do a quick example of this because I think that it is relatively interesting. So here we have a Terraform project that spins up 3 random resources, password 1, 2, and 3. I made them all different sizes, purely for show, no real, there's nothing specific about the sizes, you don't need to worry about it. We have a Terraform state file, and if we run a Terraform plan, it will tell us that there's nothing to do. So what we have here is a deployed and working Terraform program. Now we can run tf to Pulumi like so, and we'll get an index.ts. This is scanned our Pulumi project. It knows that we need a Pulumi package and the random provider. It's then created the 3 random resources, pulling in the size, just as they were in the Terraform program, and brought across our name, password 1, 2, and 3. So TF to Pulumi is really cool. We can run that again with target language, and this time we will do Go, and why not do Python while we're at it. Now if we take a look at main.go, you'll see the exact same. We're using our Go SDK. We have a Pulumi program, password 1, password 2, password 3. You'll notice that in TF to Pulumi and the Pulumi code gen in general, that we understand what it means to write Python code. We understand what it means to write Go code, and we try to adhere to those ecosystems and the patterns and the rules that they have for naming variables, for naming classes, for naming everything and types, etc. So the names and stuff may change a little bit, at least the IDs within Pulumi, but everything else should be correct and will be correct. So you can see here in Go, we have type wrappers due to the lack of generics, so we're doing pulumi.int on all the values. Lastly, we'll take a look at main.py. Oh, main.py. Silly me. And we have the same. We have password 1, password 2, password 3, and a randoms. Perfect. TF to Pulumi is a wonderful tool, and if you can use it, you should use it. However, there are some challenges with TF to Pulumi that are being addressed. Not quite as I speak, but within the vicinity of as I am speaking. And you'll see that if we go to our pull request here, we are adding Terraform 0.12 support. This is a precursor to supporting further versions of Terraform. There's also a pull request for supporting the TF state file v4. So we know that TF to Pulumi needs some love, it needs some attention. We're working on it now. It will work for some use cases, it will fail for others. Please feel free to open issues and let us know what isn't working. We are committed to making this work and making this a great experience for developers. Now, I've called this example complex. It's not actually complex. If we take a look at my main.tf, it's relatively trivial, but I'm calling it complex because what I want to show you is the more manual way of handling a TF state migration when you cannot do it via TF to Pulumi. So what we have here is we have the Terraform required providers. We've got our AWS provider being configured. We've got AWS instance being provisioned. We have an S3 bucket being created, and we have an access control list on the S3 bucket. I believe running TF to Pulumi here will fail. Yep, we have an error. And that's because the default provider's there. I probably could remove that and that would work, but that's not the point. What do we do in this case where TF to Pulumi isn't going to migrate our infrastructure? Hold on while I have some tea. Yummy. Okay. Just losing my train of thought. I was going to tell you it's a lap Samsu song, but it doesn't really matter because I'm talking to myself. All right. So what I've done here is that we have a Terraform program. It also should be no changes. Good. No changes. And we can't use TF to Pulumi. So what's our next stage? Well, our Pulumi import command is super cool. So if we scroll down, we have the bulk import operations documentation. What this allows us to do is to create a JSON file, like so, that has a list of resources with their type, their name, and their ID. And if you can produce that file, Pulumi will import all the state and generate the code for multiple resources. So this is a really cool way to do it. But the thing is, we need to get that resource list first. But because we're all developers, we can make that happen. So what I have here is a go main.go file that actually loads a subset of the TF state file, loops through all the resources, pulls out the name, ID, and type, maps them to Pulumi types, and spits out our resources.json. Here we have the AWS instance, the S3 bucket, and our ACL. And what that means is I can run a Pulumi import, providing a resources.json, and telling it to write to index.alt.ts. I may have already done this. Yeah, it's telling me it's already imported. So what we're going to do is pulumi stack rm dev force. And we'll do that again. Oh, pulumi stack init dev. Oh, what if all my AWS credentials have disappeared? Excuse me while I reconfigure my S3 credentials. Oh no, it won't be the credentials, right? That AWS region west 1. This may just be config, not my credentials. We're about to find out together. It's not okay. So now it's saying it's not in a region. Okay, what region did I use? I should know. Let me check because I put a provider US West 2. Like that. US West 2 and US West 2. All right, third time lucky. Much better. Okay, so it's telling us, do we want to confirm? You can ignore the warnings for now. We'll put in the yes. Do the magic happens. And I've gone way over in my 10 minutes, but we're having fun, so not that fast. And we want to take a look at index alt. You'll see here we have our AWS provider added. We have our instance, and if you read the article with the import changes, that's going to be in the show notes in just a moment. One of the improvements we made to the import command was to bring in all of these default fields so that everything was defined as code and we don't rely on the defaulting too much. If we scroll down, it's also protected by default, which is nice. We've got our bucket, we've got our ACL. That's great. We can do that for any of our target languages and things are great. But you might be wondering, hey, what was in that main.go? Well, let's take a quick look. If we open main.go, you'll see that I define just enough types to be able to scan a Terraform state file. So we have a type, Terraform state, which has something called resources. The resource has a name, a type, a mode, and then instances. Inside those instances, we have some attributes, and the only attributes that we care about are ID and name. So we just quickly stub all that out. We then have the Pulumi resource file description types. So we want to be able to write a Pulumi resources file with a Pulumi resource. And then we have some code here that reads the state file, unmarshals it to our Terraform state type that we mocked out. We create Pulumi resources, and then we loop over everything inside of the TF state. I'm trying to be smart about generating the ID. So we check the attributes for our name. If that exists, we use it. If not, we use the ID because there's weird things with the way the state file works. And then we spit out the resource and we write it to a file. So you can do all this. It's not too much. Now there is a lot more code in this file because I did a big copy and paste just to do this quickly. However, all of this code is available in the TF bridge repository and can be used through modules. So everything below here is the mappings that I just copy and pasted. I won't hide it from you. I'll show you it. It's all there. But this can be consumed through GoMod. I was just lazy. Okay. So that allows us to write the resources.json and pull in a file. Now, the last thing I want to touch on today, I did a live stream, a Contribx session with Paul Stack a few weeks ago, where we talked about, well, what if I want to be able to interact with Pulumi and be able to use Pulumi providers? So the stream went through it in much more detail. I'm going to be very quick. The stream link will be in the show notes in just a minute, I promise. But we have a repository called the pulumi-tf-provider-boilerplate. You can fork this, do a huge search and replace on a default value, which is, and essentially there's a target for it in the make file, which is all covered on the live stream, the last one, excuse me, which is all covered on the live stream session with Paul Stack. It's called make prepare. It will allow you to update the name and the repository and all of the files. And then you get a provider that is ready to be built and shipped. However, it's not going to be able to automatically bridge the Terraform resources. There's only one thing that you need to do, and that is to provide a resource mapping. You do that inside the provider resources.go. Now, this is a large one. Yours will not be as complex, but that's because there's some functions here to make this a little bit easier. But the only thing you need to do is first provide any config inside the config object. So if you need access keys and they can be set by environment variables, put it in. Once you've done config, you do resources. All we're doing here is saying that we have a string type from Terraform, scale weight account SSH key here as an example. And on the right, we have to tell it the token within Pulumi. And this is a direct mapping. The bridge does everything else. Now, this function is here to make it easier. But if you really wanted to, you could spec that out manually. And we cover that in the live stream that's in the link at the bottom. It's 45 minutes long. Paul Stack covers so much good stuff in it. Definitely worth checking out. Once we provided the config and the resources, and there's a lot of them here, you also provide the data. Oh, there's too many. Oh, there we go. The data sources. Terraform has a concept of resources and data resources, which allows you to do lookups. Just the same. All you need to do is provide a mapping of Terraform type string to Pulumi token, and that is all. From there, you can build a provider and ship it. So there we go. I said 10 minutes, we're at 24 minutes. However, I wanted to make sure that you leave this session with a bit of an understanding. Oh, I'm not muted, it's just my computer. Hopefully you're leaving a session with an understanding of the ways that we can migrate existing Terraform resources using the migration guide by using TF to Pulumi, using the import command, or even scripting a bulk import if required. You can build bridges to the provider using our provider template. All the links and more information is in the description. I hope you enjoyed this session, and I will see you all in a week. Have a wonderful day.